They laughed at her aircraft. Too old, too slow, too useless. But when the mission turned suicidal, only her museum piece made it back. The sound is the first thing you'd notice. In hangars A, B, and C, there was only the sterile, electric hum of the new F-39 Spectres. Their composite skins absorbed radar and sound, leaving a silence that felt cold and waiting. The air smelled of filtered oxygen and clean circuits. But in Hangar D, there was a symphony of noise. The rhythmic clang of a wrench tightening a bolt, the low, guttural hiss of ancient hydraulics being bled, the sharp, clean scent of aviation fuel and hot metal, a smell that belonged to another era. This was the home of the Albatross, and its pilot, Anya Sharma. She was a ghost at the Kestrel 7 Arctic outpost, a relic tending to a relic. The other pilots, young, sharp, and honed on simulators, saw her and her jet as a joke. A living exhibit. The mess hall was always the worst. "I swear I saw a pigeon fly out of her engine cowling yesterday," a young pilot named Jack said, his voice just loud enough to carry across the tables. Laughter rippled through his squadron. His commander, Ava Rostova, a woman whose face seemed carved from ice, offered a thin, dismissive smile. She looked over at Anya, who was eating her meal in silence, her posture perfect, her gaze fixed on the tundra visible through the panoramic window. Rostova's eyes flickered to Anya's flight suit. An old, faded olive drab, not the sleek graphite black they all wore. Anya heard them. She always heard them. The whispers about her flying museum. The jokes about needing a hand crank to start the engines. She never reacted. She simply finished her meal, her movements economical and precise, and placed her tray on the return rack. As she walked past their table, Jax leaned in again. "Hey, Sharma. Don't you ever get lonely over in Hangar D? We could send over a phonograph if you want some tunes." Anya paused for a fraction of a second, her back still to them. She didn't turn. She didn't speak. She just held the pause, letting the silence answer for her, and then continued walking, her footsteps steady and even against the polished concrete floor. Back in the hangar, the hulking shape of the Albatross waited. She wasn't sleek. Her body was a thick, powerful fuselage. Her wings swept back in a complex crescent shape that baffled modern aerodynamicists. She was a Cold War bomber, repurposed for long-range atmospheric research, and every inch of her looked brutally, stubbornly analog. Anya ran a gloved hand along a seam on the wing. It was cold to the touch, a deep, resonant cold that felt alive. "Don't listen to them, old girl," she murmured, her voice a low hum that was lost in the vastness of the hangar. The station's chief mechanic, a grizzled man named Silas, shuffled over, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. Talking to her again, Anya gave a small, rare smile. "She's the only one who listens." Silas patted a massive landing gear strut. "These kids, they don't get it. Their planes have computers. This one," he rapped his knuckles against the fuselage, producing a dull, solid thud. "This one has a soul." He looked at Anya, his expression serious. "And she only talks to you." Anya's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep, focused concentration as she peered into an open maintenance panel, a constellation of wires and copper pipes within. "Her barometric sensors are off by 0.02%. The cold is getting to her." "Everything's getting colder," Silas grunted, looking toward the hangar door, where the wind was starting to howl. The howl grew into a scream over the next few hours. The sky, once a brilliant pale blue, turned to a bruised, churning gray. A weather alert flashed across the station's monitors, then another, and another. It wasn't a storm. It was a collapse. A polar vortex, destabilized and descending with unprecedented speed. Then came the distress call. The static-laced voice of a frantic scientist crackled through the command center speakers. "Ice Station Zebra. Our habitat is compromised. Structural failure. Winds at 180 knots and climbing. I don't know how long we can." The transmission dissolved into a shriek of white noise. General Maddox, the station commander, stood before the main tactical display. Red warnings pulsed over a map of the archipelago. "Location? 300 miles north, sir," an analyst called out, "deep in the magnetic distortion zone. The storm is centered right on top of them." Commander Rostova and Jax were already there, their faces grim. "We can't fly in that, General," Rostova stated, her voice flat and absolute. "The Spectre's avionics would go haywire in that magnetic flux, and the ice accretion. No de-icing system in the world can handle that. The wings would be coated in seconds. It's a coffin." Jax nodded. "She's right, sir. It's a zero visibility, zero survivability scenario. A suicide run." Maddox slammed his fist on the console. "So we just let them die? There are 12 scientists." "Out there!" The room was silent, save for the furious howl of the wind outside and the crackle of the dead comms channel. The best pilots, with the most advanced aircraft ever built, were grounded, useless. The silence was an admission of failure, an acceptance of death. Into that hopeless silence, a quiet voice spoke, calm and clear. "The Albatross can make the flight." Every eye in the room swiveled. Anya Sharma had stepped into the command center, unnoticed. She stood near the door, her old flight suit seeming to absorb the harsh lighting. There were fresh smudges of grease on her cheek, and her hands were tucked into her pockets. She wasn't looking at the other pilots. She was looking at the tactical map, at the blinking red dot that was Ice Station Zebra. Rostova let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Don't be ridiculous, Sharma. Your museum piece wouldn't make it off the runway." Anya's gaze finally shifted from the map, not to Rostova, but to General Maddox. Her expression was unreadable, her dark eyes holding a depth that seemed to swallow the room's panic. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her wings were designed for high-altitude penetration in Arctic conditions. They have a thermal de-icing system fed directly from the engine compressors, not electric elements. It can melt anything this storm throws at it. She took a step forward. And she has no central flight computer to scramble. Everything is manual: hydraulics, cables, and direct linkage. The magnetic interference won't touch her. She stopped before the general, her presence suddenly filling the space. The mockery was gone from the air, replaced by a stunned, heavy disbelief. "I can fly that mission." For a long moment, the only sounds in the command center were the howling of the storm and the static from the dead channel. General Maddox stared at Anya, his face a mask of desperation and doubt. He looked at the flashing red warnings on the map, then back at the quiet pilot before him. Commander Rostova finally broke the silence, stepping forward. "General, with all due respect, you cannot authorize this. It's a derelict aircraft from a bygone era. We have no data on its performance. In these conditions, it's not a rescue mission, it's a sanctioned suicide. The alternative," Maddox said, his voice gravelly, "is leaving 12 people to freeze to death. That is not a sanction, it's a certainty." He turned his full attention back to Anya. He saw no bravado in her eyes, no ego, only a calm, unwavering certainty. "You're sure about this, Sharma? You're absolutely sure your aircraft can handle it?" "I am," Anya replied. Her voice was steady, a small island of calm in the storm of the room and the world. "I know what she can do." Maddox took a deep breath, the decision settling over him. He looked past Rostova, his gaze sweeping over the other pilots, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. "Then do it," he commanded. "Get your bird in the air." Anya simply nodded, turned, and walked out of the command center. The heavy door hissed shut behind her, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Jax finally let out the breath he was holding. "She's insane. Maddox is insane." Rostova didn't reply. She walked over to a secondary comm station, the one linked to hangar, maintenance and flight lines. She put on a headset, her expression cold and analytical. She was going to listen to this madness unfold. The massive doors of Hangar D groaned in protest as they slid open, fighting against the force of the wind. A wall of white fury and deafening noise slammed into the relative quiet. Snow, driven, hard as sand, blasted across the concrete floor. Inside, Silas was already moving, his actions precise and without wasted motion, as if he and Anya were two parts of the same machine. There was no checklist read from a tablet. It was a ritual. "APU online." Anya's voice cut through the wind, clear on the hangar comms. A high-pitched whine began, the sound of a turbine spinning to life, the auxiliary power unit that would breathe life into the bomber's 4 main engines. Hydraulic. Pressure, Silas yelled over the din. Building. 1,000 psi. 2,000. We are green. One by one, Anya began the startup sequence. It wasn't the clean, quick ignition of a modern jet. It was a process, a violent birth. A low moan, a cough of fuel, then a deep, shuddering roar as the first engine caught, the sound tearing through the storm. Then the second, and the third, and the fourth. The entire hangar began to vibrate, the metal roof resonating with the raw power of 4 Olympus engines, designed half a century ago to carry nuclear fire across a frozen world. In the command center, Rostova listened, her eyes closed. She could picture it all. The shuddering airframe, the smell of burnt kerosene. It was brutal, inefficient, a relic of a less sophisticated time. Yet the sound of those 4 engines stabilizing into a unified, thunderous roar sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. Anya's voice came over the main comms now, patched through to the command tower. It was shockingly calm, almost serene, against the backdrop of the engine thunder. "Tower, this is Albatross. Ready for taxi." Maddox grabbed the microphone himself. "Albatross, this is Tower. The runway is yours. Godspeed, Anya." The lumbering jet moved out of the hangar, its landing lights cutting feeble paths into the swirling whiteout. From the command center's windows, it was a ghost, a shape of impossible size moving into a maelstrom that should have torn it apart. Inside the cockpit, the world was a symphony of chaos. The roar of the engines was a constant physical pressure. The airframe groaned under the strain of the wind. Ice pellets, the size of marbles, hammered against the thick cockpit glass with sharp explosive cracks. Anya's breathing was even and slow, a stark contrast to the violence outside. Her gloved hands moved with fluid grace over the controls, a forest of analog dials, levers, and switches. "Airspeed is alive," she murmured to herself, her eyes scanning the gauges. "Attitude indicator is stable. Engine temps are climbing, but holding steady." She pushed the 4 throttles forward. The roar intensified, pressing her back into her seat. The Albatross surged down the runway, a 400,000-pound behemoth gathering speed in a complete blizzard. In the command center, they could only listen. The sound of the engines rising to a full-throated scream, the rumble vibrating through the very foundation of the building. "She's rotating," Jax breathed, his eyes wide, staring at the telemetry on the screen. "Liftoff." The rumbling sound on the comms vanished, replaced by the pure, unadulterated sound of the jet engines and the shriek of the wind. She was airborne. For 20 minutes, the only sounds from the comms were Anya's calm, methodical callouts and the ever-present roar of the storm. Entering the distortion zone. Navigational systems are unreliable. Switching to manual heading. Heavy. Icing on the leading edges. Activating thermal anti-ice. A moment of static then. Systems are green. The ice is clearing. Rostova listened, her knuckles white where she gripped the console. No computer could do this. No autopilot could make the minute, constant adjustments Anya was making, feeling the aircraft through the controls, balancing engine output against impossible wind shear, flying not with silicon chips, but with instinct and muscle memory. She was flying in a way Rostova had only read about in textbooks. A way she had been taught was obsolete. Then, a new sound cut through the roar. A loud bang, followed by a sudden change in the pitch of the engines. A chorus of alarms blared through, the comms harsh and terrifying. Jax pointed at the screen. "Engine 2 just flamed out. The ice ingestion must have stalled the compressor." The sound from Anya's cockpit was now of 3 engines straining to their limits, the unnerving silence where the 4th should be, and the screaming alarms. The audio feed was filled with the shuddering groan of an aircraft suddenly unbalanced, fighting to stay in the air. Through the chaos, Anya's voice cut through, as clear and steady as it had been in the hangar. There was no panic, no fear, only resolve. "Tower, this is Albatross. I have a flame out in Engine 2. Shutting it down. Compensating for thrust differential." A series of loud clicks could be heard. Trying for a restart. The command center was a tomb holding its breath. All that existed was the sound from Anya's cockpit, 3 engines screaming under immense strain, a wailing alarm, and the groan of an airframe being twisted by physics and fury. Restart sequence. Initiated, Anya's voice reported, each word a clipped, precise action. A series of clicks, and the whine of an igniter could be heard. Then, a low, wet cough from the speakers. A sound of failure. The engine didn't catch. Negative restart, she stated. No change in her tone. Trying again. Adjusting fuel mixture. Jack stared at the telemetry, shaking his head. It's no good. The core temperature is too low. The ice must have shocked it. She's flying a crippled 400,000-pound glider. Rostova's eyes were fixed on the altitude reading. It was dropping. Slowly, but dropping. "Shut up, Jax," she whispered, leaning closer to the speaker, listening not just to Anya, but to the machine itself. They heard Anya take a deep, controlled breath. "Okay, old girl," she murmured. A private conversation broadcast to the world. "Let's try the old way." The sound of the engines changed. Anya pulled back the power on the other 3, and the nose of the aircraft dipped. The pitch of the wind grew sharper, higher, as the Albatross began a shallow, controlled dive through the heart of the storm. "What is she doing?" Maddox demanded. "She's losing altitude faster." "She's increasing airflow," Rostova answered, her voice filled with a dawning, shocking understanding. "She's using the dive to force air into the turbine. A windmill restart. It's not in any manual. It's a desperate move." The wind howled. The alarms blared. Then came the sound they were all waiting for. A deep, guttural catch. A sputter, another. And then, with a ground-shaking roar that distorted the comms, Engine 2 roared back to life. The alarms cut out instantly. The sound of the 4 engines, unbalanced moments before, settled back into a deep, resonant harmony. Anya's voice returned as calm as ever. "Tower, Albatross. All 4 engines are green. Resuming course to Ice Station Zebra." No one in the command center spoke. Jax just sank into a chair. Rostova slowly removed her headset and wiped a bead of sweat from her temple. Her icy composure finally cracked. She had just witnessed something impossible. 15 minutes later, Anya's voice returned. "Tower, I have a visual on Zebra's emergency beacon. The habitat is heavily damaged. The ice runway is fractured. I repeat, landing is impossible." A wave of despair washed over the command center. To get so close, only to fail. "Is there anything you can do, Anya?" Maddox asked, his voice heavy. There was a pause. The only sound was the steady hum of the engines. "The station's roof is torn open, but the main structure seems to be holding. The winds are lower at this altitude." Another pause, as if she were thinking through a dozen impossible variables. "General, the Albatross was designed to deliver payloads accurately at low speed. I'm going to open the ventral doors." "The bomb bay," Jax blurted out. "She's going to what?" "I can bring her in low and hold her steady," Anya continued, ignoring him. "It will be like hovering. They'll have a window. They'll have to jump for it. It's their only chance." Maddox didn't hesitate this time. "Give them the instructions, Sharma. I'll relay that I've authorized it." The comms were a mix of sounds now. Anya, her voice a lifeline of pure command, calmly talking to the terrified scientists over their emergency frequency. "You will have 30 seconds. The bay is 20 feet wide and 40 feet long. The lip will be 10 feet above your position. Jump and brace. I will not be able to see you. I will simply hold her steady. Go on my mark." Then, a new sound. A low, grinding groan of massive hydraulic gears fighting the wind. The sound of the enormous bomb bay doors opening, letting the full force of the Arctic storm roar into the belly of the aircraft. "The doors are open," Anya said. "On your mark, Zebra team. Hold fast, girl," she whispered to the plane. "Hold fast." Her voice returned to a command. "Mark!" For 30 seconds that stretched into an eternity. The command center listened to the roar of the wind through an open fuselage 300 miles away. They heard nothing else. No screams, no sounds of impact. Just the sound of a lone pilot and her machine, hanging impossibly still in the heart of a hurricane. Doors closing, Anya's voice finally said, "Tower, I think we have them." The flight back was an exercise in quiet tension. The storm began to subside as they neared the base. When the shape of the albatross finally emerged from the low clouds, every person in the command center was at the window watching. She was no longer a museum piece. She was a savior, coated in a thick shell of ice, looking more like a glacier than an aircraft. The landing was firm, perfect. The roar of the reverse thrusters echoed across the airfield. And then, one by one, the 4 engines spooled down, their thunderous voices falling silent for the first time in hours. The silence that followed was heavy, profound. The hangar doors opened. Medical teams and ground crew rushed out to the jet. The bomb bay doors opened one last time, and 12 figures wrapped in emergency blankets were helped down, stumbling, crying, but alive. Anya was the last one out. She descended the ladder slowly, her movements stiff. She ignored the approaching general, the medics, the cheering ground crew. Her eyes were on her aircraft. She walked to the wing, placing a bare hand on its ice-cold skin, her head bowed in a silent communion. Rostova approached her, walking past the rescued scientists, past the general. She stopped a few feet from Anya, the sounds of the celebration fading into the background. Jack stood behind her, his face pale, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "Sharma," Rostova said. Her own voice was unsteady. "How you did that? The restart, the hover, it wasn't possible." Anya finally looked up. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were clear. She looked at Rostova, then at the massive, scarred, ice-sheathed machine beside them. The machine they had all mocked. The morning light was beginning to break, glinting off the ice, making the old bomber shine. She gave a small, weary smile, a gesture of grace, not triumph. "She's not a museum," Anya said, her voice quiet but carrying with absolute power. "She just remembers how to fly when the world goes dark."